When I think of underrated and underappreciated games, one that comes to mind straight away is Borderlands, the pre-sequel. A game that tells the story of one of the best villains of the 2010s decade, and contains the same gameplay style as its predecessors, was downplayed as nothing more than a side project from 2K Australia. But in reality, Borderlands the pre-sequel is much more than that. Underneath the pessimistic views towards this game from the time, there's a gem that's waiting to be uncovered. So get comfortable and grab some popcorn as we uncover the hidden gem that is Borderlands the pre-sequel. The pre-sequel is called a spin-off game by many, as it's made by a different studio, but its story and its connection to Borderlands 2 really makes me reconsider that title, and it's by far the game's greatest strength. As we know by now, given Borderlands 2 released before it, Handsome Jack was the main villain, and as I'll get onto in that review eventually, he was a great one at that. So the pre-sequel takes it upon itself to tell the story of how a man who simply used to work for Hyperion ended up becoming this all-powerful, evil, but also hilariously charismatic leader. Throughout this storyline, we get to see Jack go from a nobody to a man who can manipulate his power to get others to do his bidding, all whilst we question his real intentions. Jack tends to border on the line of morality for much of the game, as he flip-flops between having good intentions and being pure evil, and it really makes you invested in his character, as it's intriguing to see why and how he turned out like he did. Jack as a character has a charisma about him that really makes him hard to hate, as his constant jokes and interactions with the other characters throughout the story makes him by far the standout, and in many ways, he is the main character here. The story surrounding Jack culminates in his eventual heel turn, as I like to call it. After slowly taking control of Hyperion, building a robot army, and having our 4 playable Vault Hunters in the palm of his hand, Jack's true intentions start to be unveiled. He used the Eye of the Destroyer from the first game to create a planet-damaging laser beam, much like a certain Darth Vader from Star Wars. But the real turning point is when the 4 Vault Hunters from the original Borderlands betray Jack and destroy his super weapon. Instead, we head to the Vault, where Jack interacts with a symbol and has visions of a new weapon that he can use later down the line. But after being burnt by Lilith, he's left scarred, and now he wears a mask as he takes on his new persona, Handsome Jack. The way that the pre-sequel ties in and sets up Borderlands 2 really is a sight to behold. The backstory of the series' best character was entertaining from start to finish, but the best part was the way it includes all the little things. We get to see the origins of the robot army that Jack built, and why he hates all the claptrap units that used to work for him. We see how Hyperion reached a new level of evil with Jack in charge, and how in between the first and second game, they were able to become such a huge force. It is risky to make a backstory in a character who's already well received, and doesn't necessarily need a backstory. But if it pays off, just like it has here, it only makes the character and the rest of the story surrounding it even better, and I think Borderlands the pre-sequel's greatest strength is that it's able to enhance the rest of the Borderlands universe. In fact, by this point, the Borderlands universe really was fantastic. Off the back of the first 2 games, you knew what to expect coming into the pre-sequel, with plenty of jokes and pop culture references, weird Easter eggs, and side characters everywhere on the moon of Elpis.
No! Here comes the pain!
Elpis sort of acts as an Australia in space, as 2K Australia weren't afraid to show off the Aussie humour throughout this game, and in a funny way, it really makes the moon of Elpis feel different to Pandora, while still retaining and in many ways improving on that funny Borderlands charm. The moon itself is absolutely stunning to look at, with some of my favourite vistas in the series. Ice-cold rivers and craters replaced the desert scene before it, and it was great to see some more interesting locations than perhaps we were used to seeing. Concordia is a great hub area too, packed with everything you need in one place, and given its smaller size than its earlier counterparts, it's able to have a bit more life about it. The world and story of the pre-sequel is great, and it provides a great base for everything else. But given this is a game after all, it needs good gameplay. And while I'm glad to say, the pre-sequel also makes some good steps in this aspect. Whilst not overly revolutionary, there are 2 main things the pre-sequel does differently. The first of which is the movement and the oxygen system. Given we're on a moon, gravity and oxygen tend to work a bit differently. Out here, you're given an oxygen kit, or an Oz kit as they're known. This opens up the new boost jumping and slams that make the pre-sequel play differently to the other Borderlands games. This slight change makes all the difference, as it makes the usual running around the map quicker, but more importantly, more fun. It changes combat as well, as now you can hop around and have mid-air battles, rather than just being limited to ground-based combat. The oxygen system isn't a huge change either, but having that added feeling of needing to find an oxygen zone changes how you play again, and it really adds up to make the game feel different. Maybe that feeling of it being different is why people didn't take to the pre-sequel like the other games. And speaking of which, there is one more thing that changes the way you play this game, and is another component that people are pretty split on. The pre-sequel introduces a completely new mechanic called the grinder, and it divides opinion like nothing else in this game. The grinder allows 3 weapons of any rarity to be combined together to make something that in theory should be better. The ability to moonstone grind weapons to get additional effects adds to the fun, and variety of the weapons you can create. But why is it so hated? Well, this system does change the core fundamentals of Borderlands, in the sense that typically, you usually get loot from killing enemies or farming bosses. So having it come from what seems like a random slot machine did annoy some players. This could become frustrating in the endgame, as you look to get better loot, but for the average player, who may play through the game once or twice like me, it's honestly a feature that only enhances the experience. It allows you to get rid of bad weapons for a better one, or gamble good weapons at the chance of getting a legendary, and just gives that something extra to do. So to all the people hating on the grinder, all I can say is just simply ignore it. There's nothing forcing you into using it, and if you don't like it, it's not the be-all and end-all of this game. Other than the innovations the pre-sequel makes, the rest of the gameplay is much the same as games before it. That classic satisfying looter-shooter gameplay loop returns. And I'm not sure whether me and my mate got unlucky when we played, but legendaries felt exceedingly rare, and therefore even more precious. The boss battles are on par with Borderlands 2, showing huge improvements in number and spectacle than that of the first game. And particularly, the last boss of the DLC was so hard that we considered quitting. It was a difficulty spike that I don't think we were prepared for. But in retrospect, I think if the difficulty were managed better, it really could have been incorporated more into the game as a whole, with boss fights being a bit too easy until the finale. I would say it's one of the easier games in the series, particularly given the strength of the Vault Hunters. Nisha was the character I played as, and her special ability was extremely fun to use, and only got better towards the end of the game once I could dual-wield weapons. On the whole, the Vault Hunters are solid, with their own distinct character traits and charms, and each of them can be used effectively, with particular builds being useful in the endgame. To wrap things up, I want to end with a question. Do you think Borderlands the pre-sequel is underrated and underappreciated? I never see enough love for the things this game does differently, and instead, I see people thinking the game is held back by its innovations. But I couldn't disagree more, and I'm firmly in the camp that believes that pretty much every major change from 2K Australia was for the better, to make this game stand out whilst also retaining the look and feel of a Borderlands game, as things like the humour and the game not taking itself too seriously are very important components. It's for these reasons why I'd give Borderlands the pre-sequel a final score of 72 out of 100. This was my first time playing through this game, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. The story was fantastic and was meaningful. The gameplay was superb and more exciting than the previous 2 games. And the Moon of Elpis was visually stunning. Its only drawbacks, to me, are more franchise-wide problems that hamper every Borderlands game in some way, like some outdated mission designs. But they're not present enough here to change my opinion too much. So I hope that covers it, and I hope I've been able to show you why the pre-sequel isn't as mediocre as some people say. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and what score you'd give out of 100, as I love hearing everyone's opinion. And consider subscribing as well, to help me reach my goal of 1,000 subscribers. But I've been Ranger, and this has been why the pre-sequel is a hidden gem.